Welcome back for another exciting edition of Fellow Freaks, a spotlight feature of the Freaks of the Vine podcast. Our guest today has been most recognized as one of the greatest voices in Christian rock and metal over the past 3 decades. He is most known for his 23 years as the frontman of the first incarnation of Tourniquet, a band that has been long considered one of the top 5 Christian metal bands of all time. Many studio recordings and even a solo project later, he is presently in the studio again, working on the rebirth of my personal all-time favorite metal group. Hailing originally from the Bay Area of San Francisco, this man I speak of is none other than Luke Easter himself. Luke, what is up, my brother? Welcome to the show.
That's quite the buildup. Thank you. I didn't know all those things about myself. So sound much more impressive than I am.
Oh, hey, it sounds good to me. Let's talk about first. You obviously came from California originally. I'm in Kansas, and I originally too am from California. I'm a Riverside product. Spent a lot of time in Oceanside, Carlsbad area before I moved to Kansas back in the early to mid '80s. And you came from San Francisco Bay Area. What part exactly?
I'm from a little beach town on the peninsula called Pacifica.
Okay,
We are most notable. Let's see, we're the birthplace of Rob Schneider.
really?
And we have the only Taco Bell on the beach.
Oh,
And like
okay.
surf, walk up to the window, get, Taco Bell, and then jump right back in the water and keep surfing.
That's awesome, man. That's
It's
awesome.
cool, but it wasn't enough to make me stay. So
How long have you been now in Nashville?
it's 3 years last month.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself because there's a question I wanted to ask you near the end of the interview. I do always do a lightning round for quick questions, fun, and one of them has to pertain to I don't know. Maybe I should just go with my fifth option and ask you. Um, if I've always tell people like the lyrics of Steely Dan's "My Old School," California crumbles into the sea, and that's the day I go back. I just I went back once, twice since '83, and it's just not the same place I
Yeah.
remember growing up.
No.
It's sad. I mean, Encinitas and Carlsbad were really cool little places. I had some local caught seafood joints on the beach. I When I moved to Kansas, they didn't even know what a torta was because we had little food stands. I get here and they're like, "We have El Gringo down the road," and I'm like, "Dadgummit, it's since changed. We got plenty of tortas here in this town, but yeah, you get spoiled."
Yeah. Yeah. I've not had decent Mexican food since I got here. So
That's one claim to fame California can say.
yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah. Well, I want to jump into how did you get involved in music? What inspired you? I know you. I read a bio on you that said you had been involved in music as young as you can remember. But what
Yeah.
kind of got you into that?
I just always liked music. I've always liked singing. I've always my sister got me a really cool Christmas present this year. She tracked down, I had this Mickey Mouse record player when I was a kid. And you open the lid, it's
Oh
plastic,
yeah.
his face inside, and his arm has the needle in his finger, and I would spend hours, probably from the time I was like 3, just listening to records
Oh
on
man, that's
that
awesome,
record player. I still have some of those vinyls too, so it was very
really.
cool when she sent me that. But I mean, yeah, it started off with just, novelty records, lots of Sesame Street, lots of, Disney, Mickey Mouse and all that stuff. My parents got really into like Maranatha music and Keith Green. My dad loved Andre Crouch, so I
Oh
grew up
yeah.
on like all of that kind of stuff. And, just at some point I remember when it was like this epiphany that, oh, anybody could write a song. Oh, anybody could, decide they want to be a musician. And that was kind of mind blowing. But I didn't think that would be me. And then, at some point in my teens, I was like, you know what? I have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of ideas about, why that record sucks and why that song is amazing. I'm going to see if I can do it. And started playing with friends, and it's now here we are, and I get to speak to cool people like you.
Oh, well, you're putting me on. I'll be modest about that one, but thank you. But that's the great part is getting a chance to talk to you about your venture. So I have to, in order to kind of, I'm going to give you a little quick snippet of a story. I'll make it shorter, but just kind of how I discovered your voice. Like a lot of people, I'm like you, a student of music. I think that's fair to say that being a student of music, where you're listening to, like maybe a classic Yes album, and you're like, man, John Anderson's got a great voice, and how's Chris Squire doing that on the bass or whatever. And my mom was like Neil Sedaka. I have 9 older brothers. I got inundated with 60s and 70s stuff as a child, but becoming a believer in the late 80s. I went to a church that like I was listening to like everything from Slayer to Nuclear Assault to Neil Diamond. But when you want metal, it wasn't that there wasn't good Christian metal at that time. It just wasn't what I was kind of after, if that makes sense.
It was more
And
limited,
so,
yeah.
yeah, it was a bit more limited. Early 90s, that all really began to change in Christian music scene. In fact, 94, I often say 1994 was the pivotal year that where Christian metal, rock, alternative, college alternative rock changed the game. I mean, there were bands that were doing genres before the secular world were even doing it, and that was never the case. But I had my experience was I had walked in. I know I had to get rid of all the music. I had just one of those moments in my life where I just had to get rid of everything I had. It was my God. It was my idol. And I walked into this Christian music bookstore in Topeka, Kansas. And I want to say it was late 90s, 93, excuse me, late 93, early 94. And I cannot remember when Vanishing Lessons came out, but that was one of the first. You remember the little headsets that they would do and they let you put the tape in and listen. And so my first indoctrination at all to Tourniquet was you. I had not heard the first 3 albums. I heard Vanishing Lessons. And side A of Vanishing Lessons on a cassette was by far and away one of the greatest ventures I ever had. I'll never forget that. And I have no problem telling you that. From, Bearing Gruesome Cargo to Pecking Order to, I mean, just everything on that, the title track. And so how exciting was that time for you? And how did you try out? Kind of tell us about the lead into Tourniquet at that time.
So I started off playing bass horribly in a garage band with friends,
Fair enough.
and at some point decided that I wanted to, take a crack at being the singer, and got
Have you
into
always sung?
I've been singing since I was like 4,
Fair enough.
chapel, and but I didn't know if I could be a rock singer or a metal singer, but yeah, I
Sure.
wanted to be. Um, but I got in a local band in the South Bay area, and did that for a couple years, and decided that uh, that it had run its course, and that I needed to either figure out if I was good enough to take it up a notch, or I was going to have to cut my hair and go back to school. And Brian Gray from The Blamed connected me with Victor, and I sent in a cassette. And a few weeks later, I was in LA auditioning, and a week after that, I was in LA rehearsing, and a week after that, we were opening up the Pathogenic tour in Oklahoma. So it
Wow.
really, really quickly. Initially, I mean, it was just, it was exciting. I mean, I was 22 years old, and I got to quit my job and go on tour.
Yeah.
So, it's like, living the dream, you know.
Right.
And tour ends, and you come home and have to find a job and realize that not everything you thought it was going to be, but it was still, it was awesome. I loved the Pathogenic album.
Yeah.
I was a big, fan of the band. And so, getting to, jump in a van and crisscross the states for a few weeks was awesome. So by the time we got to doing Vanishing Lessons, um, we were ready. We were firing on all cylinders. Uh, Ted and Gary primarily had written a ton of, of great stuff. Victor, had a song, but we had a really good set of songs. We had a really good producer lined up. We shifted gears on that one and worked with Jim Faraci. All the previous records had been done by Bill Metoyer. And we figured, new singer, new producer, we'll just change things up. And yeah, I mean, out of all of the work that I've done with Tourniquet, I wouldn't say that that one is my favorite. I like some of the production and some of the performances better on later records, but I couldn't have asked for a better debut album than Vanishing Lessons.
Fair enough.
It played to a lot of my strengths in terms of being a little. It was still heavy. It was still metal, but it was a little bit more melodic overall than probably what had come before. And it was just the right point in time. I mean, Metallica had blown up with the Black Album. Megadeth had Rust, not Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction. So all
Yes.
of these heavy bands were starting to chart and had figured out how to be heavy, but also how to focus on songs instead of just being, brutal and aggressive. And
Fair.
so we kind of caught that wave with Vanishing Lessons and made the perfect record for us for that time.
That's a great way to explain it because I think when I listen to, obviously getting into Vanishing Lessons more of my style of metal that I wanted to listen to, but at that time, and I would have rivaled. I remember playing a couple tracks off of Vanishing Lessons for a couple friends of mine who weren't into Christian music at all. But I kind of would go back if somebody would be. I started doing a radio program in '94, and I did it in Topeka from '94 to 2001. And we were a 50,000 watt station in the middle of nowhere. So our signal, we're an hour west of Kansas City, but our signal would reach Kansas City on Saturday night. Everybody else would drop their signal. We'd leave ours up. And then I just volunteered to do it. It was a great show, but we played everything that nobody else would play, and that's what was our. So listening to, I got into the Prayer Chain. I thought they
Mhm.
were fantastic. The Shawl album had come out that
Yep.
year. REX Records, no matter how they were badly or poorly managed or ran out of money, had signed some great bands. And you had Sixpence None the Richer were extremely melodic, but they had an edge to them before they hit the big time. There was just such a vast outpouring of all this great music. And for me, when I would go to my metal, Bride's Scarecrow Messiah album had come out, and I just recently talked to Dale Thompson about that. There's just a lot of great stuff, but you guys had hit, and I think I didn't get a chance because obviously the internet's a beautiful thing in some regards.
Yeah.
I recently found a Cornerstone video of you guys playing before Vanishing Lessons, and you were singing, and you were nailing those songs.
Thank
Like
you.
it was such a trip to listen to it now after all those years of going back, and I know the full catalog and everything that you guys did together and what you didn't do with the band originally, but your performance at that Cornerstone, I don't know, might have been 93.
Probably 93. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Eric and Victor and Gary were just charged, nailing everything. Ted's Ted playing his drum, and you're just owning it. And you owned the songs you guys played, and it was just what a wonderful experience that must have been. But it was a joy for the listeners, for the fans.
Yeah, when I got the audition, or well, when I got the job, one of the first things I asked was, or actually it was at the audition. I can't do the falsetto stuff. My falsetto isn't that high. They're like, no, that's fine. Just basically the agreement was stay true to the song. Follow the melody. Deliver it as close to the record as you can, as you. So over time, as I got more comfortable with they're guys. Guy made those first three albums and did a great job,
Sure.
and Guy did really great performances. But from '93 on, they were kind of mine. They're my songs now. Uh,
Yes.
and I don't mean that to take anything away from Guy or anything, but I was the one that was entrusted with keeping those songs alive and giving them legs. And so that's basically what I did. Was just try to be as true to the record as I could be, but still make it me.
Yeah.
And, you know I think early on it was a little bit of an odd fit because I came from more of a pop rock, hair metal kind of background in terms of the stuff that I liked. I liked the heavy stuff, but on a normal day, if I got up in the morning, it's like, what am I going to listen to? Metallica or Bon Jovi? I'd put on Bon Jovi,
Fair
so
enough.
um, it was I wasn't Ted didn't really want me to tell people that when I first joined the band, but at the same time, he was fine with me bringing some of that into the performance side. So, I'm not saying that I turned tourniquet shows into a Bon Jovi show, but
No.
we stood out a little bit from some of the other bands we would play with because there was a lot more for that time, especially a lot more crowd involvement
Yeah.
and trying to make it like a communal experience, right? I mean, yes, we're performing, but you're here to sing, as loud as you want with us. So let's just have fun, you know. Um, and so yeah, that was really the only that was the main difference between whatever had been before and what happened then. But yeah, I tried to just be true to the songs because I was a fan. So
Yeah.
why break something that isn't why fix something that's not broken?
Absolutely. But you have to put your own spin on it. I mean, I think
Exactly.
the worst thing you can do or anybody can do is try to mimic something and you don't have the
Yeah,
range to do it.
yeah,
Or that's just not your style. I think for anybody,
yeah.
and
Or
that's
even if it is, I mean, you look at somebody like Arnell from Journey, killer voice, great songs. I wouldn't want that job. You know,
no, no.
it's
You
get
never
up
having
and
to live
get
in
up and
the
sing like Steve
shadow.
Perry every night. You're not Steve Perry, so you
Yeah.
know,
There's only one Steve Perry, but
yeah,
it's like if you can cover the songs, I think Foreigner's lead singer that's been with them for a while now, he does a really good job of that too. Did you happen to just curiosity, have you seen the recent recording live show with Lou Graham getting back up there with them?
I haven't. No,
Okay, do yourself a favor and and just look at that up later. I'm blown away. I cannot believe that old Sweet Lou sounds as good as he did because I thought his voice was done. But to hear him sing a month ago, I was extremely. It was like the singer's there. They let him up there to do like a few songs, and he
yeah,
just
yeah,
nailed it. And it
that's
was just
awesome.
so cool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Um. There's part of me that wants to talk and dive in a little bit into some of this. I guess maybe the tough parts of the over the years of Tourniquet, but I don't really want to do that to you. So I'm going to ask you. Tell us a couple fond memories of your time when, especially when it was you, Ted, and Aaron. Although Victor's replacement, Denny, right? What
Yeah.
was
Oh,
this?
Vince Dennis.
That's Dennis. That's right. He wasn't there for very long, but he was a great player.
Yeah, he was. Vince was fun. I mean, Vince off stage compared to Vince on stage was like two completely different people. Off stage, he's just like really soft spoken and laid back and, just very kind and nice. And then you put him on stage with a bass and he just turned into this beast. Um,
That's awesome.
Vince is the only person that I've genuinely had to like really, really pay attention to where he was on stage because I didn't want to get hurt. Because
Fair.
he's just gone when he's playing. He's just in the moment, in the zone, just going for it. And so if you get in the
I
way,
You got to look out.
you get yeah,
There comes the bowl.
yeah,
Did he ever? He did not record on any.
no,
Okay,
no.
that's right, because there was a
He was just
period
live.
between them. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, as far as like with times with you and Ted and Aaron, tell us a couple of good things that happened through that time.
we played a lot. We hung out a lot. We watched a lot of stupid movies. A lot of Dumb and Dumber.
Classic.
A lot of Napoleon Dynamite.
Right.
Um, it was good. I mean, it was different. I mean, I know some people, that think that, this era or that era, is the true band, but there was the continuity of that band. There was
Agreed.
constant turnover, um, which is good and bad depending on what, your perspective and depending on what came of it. But we laugh a lot. And when it was time to work, we worked hard, and when it was time to goof off, we goofed off hard. So,
That's good to know. You guys there were obviously chunks of time that would go between each record. That's not uncommon. Life happens. It's hard to be, I imagine, Christian rock metal. It's not, you're not getting superstar status with the wallet, but you also have to feed your family as you guys were getting into being married, having children, and you're trying to keep the continuity of playing in the music and playing in the band, and then also having a life outside of it. What was the balance like for that over the years?
um, it felt pretty natural. I mean, we were never, road dogs. Some of us would have loved nothing more than to, climb in a bus and leave for a year. But there was always something holding us back from that. Um, so it it just kind of developed a rhythm. Ted was self-employed. Aaron and I had both found jobs that would, let us pick up and leave when we needed to, as long as there was enough notice. But I mean, even, from the earliest days of me being in the band, they were all in Southern California, and I was in the Bay Area, up in Northern California. So, if we weren't working, I was at home and they were down there, and, phone calls, emails, stuff like that. But, our lives were fairly separate in terms of the day to day. And I think in some ways it might have hurt us relationally in some ways, over the years, but
Makes
in other
sense.
ways, it I think it kept things. I think part of why we had the longevity that we had, especially with that trio lineup of Ted and Aaron and me, was because we didn't live in each other's pockets. you know. When it was time to work, I'd hightail it down to LA, and we would do stuff. And I mean, even after that, I mean, Aaron honestly was the only one left in California at a certain point. Ted had moved to Milwaukee, and I moved to Texas for a while, and then moved back to California. So yeah, there was always distance, but we knew when it was time to work, it was time to work. So, whether it was a show or a record, you showed up, you know, all ready to go, and you
Yeah.
just jumped feet first and your head first, actually, and just went for it, and it worked for us.
As far as the time with obviously Vanishing Lessons being a bit different, because like you said, Gary and Ted had wrote a lot of the music of that album. You were much more involved in the writing process. I know with you have some songwriting credits, but we know that that goes further than just the credits. Obviously, with like Crawl to China and Microscopic View of a Telescopic Realm and things of that nature. But what of those albums can you talk about? Maybe your favorite one?
Of the post Vanishing Lessons ones,
Yes. Or
if
do
we're
you have
talking,
one?
I don't really have favorites. I mean, I don't have kids, but I imagine it's, everybody loves their kids, and from people that I know that have kids, at any given moment, any one of their kids is their favorite, just depending on what's happening.
Yeah. It's one
You
of
know,
one of them's pissing you off or the other one's
yeah,
not. Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it flips. It's like, you know what? I don't like you anymore. I like them. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. I mean, I don't listen to Tourniquet very much because I don't really like to listen to my own voice.
I get it.
Um, but every now and then, I'll put something on, and sometimes I cringe and go, "That could have been better," or other times I'm like, "That's actually kind of good." But I mean, they're all special in their own way. I mean,
Yeah.
Crawl was just, very experimental. We were signed to a bigger label. We reconnected with Matoyer. Um, the label didn't know what to do with us, and that became very,
Diadem.
that became very apparent on their side when A&R reached out and wanted demos of the material. And as long as I've been in the band, that's that wasn't how we had worked. We showed up with songs and recorded them and said, "Here, this is the album." So we noodled. We all got together at Ted's house, just Ted and Aaron and me, with a 4-track, and Ted had a bunch of starters. They weren't even actual songs, and so we just sent them a cassette with a bunch of nonsense on it and said, it might sound like this, it probably won't.
There.
So they really had no idea how the record was going to sound until we finished it and sent it in. So but it was cool because every song on that record has a different guitar sound. Um, and we kind of pushed the weird factor on that record as far
You
as we
did.
can.
Yeah.
Uh, which, I mean, I don't think it's that weird. I know other people hear something like bats and it's like, what?
That's exactly the
Oh,
song that was in, yeah.
yeah,
But I
you know,
didn't. I didn't either. I thought what I don't want to hear from any band that I like is the same thing exactly on
yeah,
the next record.
yeah,
I mean, if you
yeah.
take Queensryche's Rage for Order and you're
Mhm.
only going 2 albums later to Empire,
Yeah,
there's nothing similar about either one other than it's the same five guys playing those songs.
exactly.
And that's what keeps it interesting. You hear the voices, you hear the guitar, you hear there's a makeup that's similar,
Yeah,
but the songs aren't the same. And anybody I read and I had to ask Dale about this. I think you'd appreciate it. They are Bride is best known for Snakes on the Playground, 1992. No doubt about it. But
I
I
would say
was
that's
re
the best album.
it is overall. I remember though seeing a post online and these people were going back, man, I wish you'd go, and he was like, think you guys are missing the point of what a
Yeah.
band is. It's like we're not going to stay. We're not going to do Snakes Part 2, 3, and 4, although there's elements. So when you think about something like Crawl to China, and then personally, where Moth and Rust Destroy, that is one of the greatest albums ever by a band put together. And I'm a huge Pathogenic and a huge Vanishing Lessons fan, and I loved Crawl to China. I wore out that CD, but I think where Moth and Rust Destroy, you guys just, I don't know, there was just something about that. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
So, with Crawl, we pushed the weird. I'll even go further back. Stop the Bleeding is heavy. Psycho is heavier. Pathogenic for its time, especially in the Christian, market, there was nothing like it. I mean, yes,
No,
there's other bands doing heavy stuff, but in terms of having, like the right blend of heaviness and melody with really good production, because we whether it was before me or after me, we're all very conscious of, does this sound good? Would I listen to this? Is the production good? um and you don't need a huge budget to have you know good production.
music.
You just
Yeah.
have to have somebody with good ears, and you
Yeah,
have to
that's right.
be willing to hold the line that this doesn't sound right. Can we do it again? Can we fix it? um so going heavier, super heavy, there was really no other way to go when we got to Vanishing Lessons but the way that we did. Okay, we haven't really worked that vein yet, so let's go that way. And then Carrie was kind of in the same vein and kind of took us to the nth degree of that more accessible while still being, hard rock. So then we do Crawl, and it was like this weird flux period, just in music in general. Grunge was
Yeah.
on the ascent, metal wasn't cool, boy bands were taking over, nobody knew which way was up. And we were just happy to still, be relevant. And so we were like, you know what, we're not going to bother, we're the Nashville label, we have a bigger, budget, we have this, we have that. Let, let's just write what we want to write. I would say that record is no less heavy than
No.
the others. It just is more. There's a lot more stuff coming out of left field than on other records. And then we did acoustic archives, and that was just its own thing, just to again
Yes.
just to stay visible while we were figuring out the next move. So then we get to microscopic, and by that point it was all three of us, without discussing it, we were just like all like talking one day, and it was like, I think the next record has to be really heavy. And like all of us kind of said it at the same time. We didn't say it at the same time, but we all got to the same, it was like, yes, I'm so glad you think that, because I think that he thinks that, so that became microscopic view. And then, again, it's, we could have leaned into that thrashier side, like, but there's a lot of prog on that record, but it's a back to basics thrash record in a lot
I
of
think
ways.
it honestly, and it to me, although I say that I think, where Moth and Rust Destroy to me is genius. I think Microscopic was the best utilization of your voice.
Thank you. I think
Incredible.
that some of my favorite performance, again, not that I sit there and listen to myself all day, in terms of doing the metal thing, some of my favorite performances, going back to what you were saying before, are on Moth. Um, because microscopic was really thrashy, and then we come out with Moth that, suddenly everything's tuned down to C sharp, and
Yeah.
it's really sludgy, riffs as much as it is, metal type stuff. Um, it- we had lost Aaron for a while during that record. And we hadn't found another guitar player, and so that record was really just Ted and me. And he wrote all the music. I think there's 8 or 9 songs on that record. I wrote lyrics
Yes.
for 2 of them. That's the only record that we collaborated on the writing on. But it was that whole experience was really chill. We it was us and Bill, and Ted had a house in Milwaukee, had a finished rec room downstairs, and so I'd do a vocal take and then turn around and we'd shoot pool. I did half the record. I wasn't even in headphones. I just stood over Bill's shoulder and just sang into a mic. Um, so it was a really relaxing record to make. I think I did all the vocals in just over a week. Um, but yeah, I mean, there was a progression. Now, I will say that after Moth, I would say we kind of lost the plot a little bit collectively. I shouldn't say everything. Songs started sounding a lot more samey to me after that record.
Except for Chart of the Elements. That's always
Oh
been one of the
yeah,
coolest songs, right?
charts weird. I mean, and
But I can see what you mean. I can see that there's sort of I don't want to say it's a blueprint. Is that fair, though? A
I
little
wouldn't
bit
say
of
a
a,
blueprint so much. I mean, Moth, there's a lot of using, similar riff structures, but it feels more like a motif in, like, more of a classical setting where,
that's a great way to put it.
the whole movement is built off of this, bunch of chords. Go. So Moth has its moments where things kind of one runs into the next, but they're all still distinct. By the time we got to Antiseptic, which again, I mean, I'm proud of most of that record,
As
but
you should be.
listening to it back, I don't, production wise, it holds up really, really good. That's one of our best sounding records, but um, it just overall as a record, I don't think that all of it has aged well. And if I could go back and redo it, I, I'd probably push more to change a couple things. And there's definitely a couple vocals that I would not have delivered the way that I did.
That's fair. And that's the beautiful part of hindsight. Although I think you have so much to be proud of, and I know you are. Can I ask of the few producers that you worked with, and in no disrespect to any one of them by asking you this question, I think you've enjoyed them all. Who surprised you the most
Surprised how.
with how they were able to capture what you guys wanted,
Um,
or maybe forward thinking enough that when they were doing some mix, you were like, "Yes, that's it."
I would say not so much surprise, but in terms of really getting us and always, always delivering, it would be Bill. I mean, Jim
Yeah.
was good. Before Vanishing Lessons, I'd never done a record, so Jim was the first producer I ever worked with, and I had no idea what to expect. Um, and then we jumped right back in with Bill after Collected Works, and or actually, did Bill did Collected Works? I think I'm trying. I don't know. It's all a
You're
blur now.
yeah,
I
those are
think
your
he did
two
the two
extra
new
tracks.
tracks,
Yeah.
but that was my first time working with Bill. But Bill is Bill's the fifth Beatle. If
Fair.
we'll sound, the music's in our DNA, so whether it's, version one, whether it's Vanishing Lessons era, whether it's the trio era, we're going to sound like Tourniquet
Yeah.
because, we've all to varying degrees built that sound together. But whether we sound like the best version of Tourniquet, that's out of our hands. We leave that to the professionals. And Bill, there's a reason we always wind up going back to Bill. Sometimes it's good to do something different. With when we did Antiseptic, it was another one of those times where we were like, we need to change things up a little bit. We want to do something different. And I very much enjoyed working with Neil. Neil Kernan. He's done a ton of records that I
Yeah,
love.
he's no very notable.
Had a lot of fun, talking about Lynch Mob and Dokken and Queensryche, behind the scenes, between takes and, after dinner and all this, that was awesome. But, if we never worked with anybody else again but Bill Metoyer, I'd be happy as a clam.
Fair.
Bill is a genius. He can get very frustrated with us. We're like, yeah, we want to do this. He's like, what? You know, and he might grouse and complain and cajole, but he always delivers, and his records they hold up. That there's a lot of producers that come along and they're very much of that time, and it's like, oh yeah, I loved that in the 80s, or I loved that in the 70s. Bill has been doing this since forever, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any records that he's done that sound dated. And if they do,
Yeah,
it's probably more the band's fault than his.
fair enough.
'Cause at the end of the day, he's gonna do what the band says. He knows that he's there to help the band achieve what they want. But by the same token, at least for me, we're working with you because we like what you bring to the table. So if you feel really strongly, then we need to at least take that into account before we make a decision.
Was it
So
easier to work over the years? I mean, I guess, there's always been sort of all right, fandom, right? Because ultimately I'm talking to you today as a fan. I had the chance during the time I was doing radio. I interviewed Gary once, and Aaron was there staying with him. He had just joined the band. So he was staying
okay,
with him and I think at that point it was his wife. It had to have been because Eric was gone. And then the second time I interviewed Ted a couple of years later. He and I kind of kept in contact a little bit through email over the years. And I never was he very difficult to work with, or was that a misnomer as a fan? And you don't have to answer that, I guess. I don't want to put you
I
in
don't difficult. I don't think is the right word, but he was challenging to work with.
okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Um, he always had a very clear idea of what he wanted to hear, especially if it was something he wrote. And so, if you a case in point, Bearing Gruesome Cargo would have been half as long if we had used the arrangement that Ted originally wrote. But Ted wrote vocal parts like a drummer. He was not
Gotcha.
a singer. So to him, and I do the same thing. There's stuff that I've, written and then tried to work up, with somebody and realized that, yeah, it sounds really great in my head, but when somebody actually has to breathe, they're probably not going to be able to sing it like that. That was the
Yeah.
case with Bearing Gruesome Cargo. It like the way it goes now is that I carry with me over. It's that kind of pace. The way he had originally structured it was, I carry with me over 20 years of it. And there was just nowhere to breathe. And it wasn't a fight, but it did wind up with us kind of in a corner bickering. And Jim inserted himself into it and took us into neutral corners. And I was like, dude, I can't breathe. I can't sing that song. That was one of
Yeah.
the few songs we didn't do pre-production for. And so we
Oh,
were we were working it up on the floor at Rumbo, and we were playing to a scratch. Ted had a work cassette that had a scratch track on it, and he was trying to play the drums over it, and I was supposed to sing with it just to keep everything in time, and it just didn't work. But once Jim got it across to him that that's great that you can hear it in your head that way, but he's going to have to sing it every night when you guys take this on the road, and he can't breathe. So what if you do it like blah? And worked on it for a couple minutes, and yeah, well, what's wrong with that? you know that's what we've been saying for the last
they
hour
know.
and a half, dude. you know
That's
so
funny.
there were times like that were easier. There were other times where he could just be obstinate, but all of us can be. But yeah, I mean,
Fair.
working with Ted was not for everybody. Not that it's a contest, but I think that I mean, Aaron might have me beat by a little bit, but I hear from a lot of people that that in their mind, it seems like I worked with him longer than anybody. I don't know why that is. I
Yeah.
think I don't walk. I've never walked into a band situation like, I'm in charge and, this is my band now and you guys are all going to do what I say. I, I'm just happy to be there. And I just want to, I want to be the best at what you guys need me to be for this band,
Yeah.
and
You've never struck me as a guy who had LSD, lead singer's disease.
I try not to be. I'm sure I've had my moments, but I think that's probably some of why I had the longevity that I had
Agreed. Yeah.
with
You weren't
Ted.
a prima donna. You were a
Yeah.
band member. You were a
I,
brother. And.
And if I did have something I felt strongly about, I tried to do it, offline, where it was just him and me, or just, whoever was in the band at that time,
And that's the proper way to handle it. That's actually
that,
the biblical way to handle it.
nobody needs to hear, nobody needs to see everybody else's dirty laundry.
And I applaud you. That really shows your level of integrity that you have kept that out of the public circle, and I think that that's really good. And I do appreciate you answering that, and I thought you did a really good job of that.
I mean, look, there's a lot I could say, and was it always awesome? No, it wasn't always awesome. But
Right.
you know what? There's three sides to every story, right? There's your side, my side, and the truth. Ted's not here anymore, so I don't feel like it. Gary and I will talk about stuff because we have a lot of shared experiences, but we also have a lot of history together. So we'll talk about stuff, and some of it's remember the good times, some of it's remember how hard that time was. But we were both there, so it's not like piling on. But just in
Yeah.
general, I don't, you know, Ted and I weren't speaking when he passed. I would, if he had called me up and said, "Do you want to do a record?" I would have said no. But if he had called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to sit on the phone with me and watch Dumb and Dumber?" I would have said, "Heck yeah," and and just sat there laughing my head off with him. I miss that, you know.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah,
honestly, that's really all anybody needs to know.
that's perfectly said, brother. And that's yeah, I respect that. So let's jump into the future part of Tourniquet. I mean, you
Sure.
left near the end of 2015. You have this friend named Gary Lanier, and I really pray that he writes a follow-up book to his manifesto. I pray that one day he writes his his road back. The prodigal son, however you want to word it. That really isn't that story. I have never read it publicly. Did I follow it? Yeah, darn right I did, because he wrote a song with Push and Broom that you're very familiar with. I was a custodian, second shift at an elementary school.
Hmm.
We have young children. In order for us to not have to worry about childcare, I watch my kids during the day. I work at night. My wife works during the day. She gets home, relieves me. We see each other for 5 minutes, probably what kept us married for the 5 years of our tumultuous 20s. But what had happened was, I remember hearing that song and having this, I've been a pastor now for 9 years, and I've gone through my life, but Push and Broom hit. It hit. And I think anybody, not only did it hit, I think it hits people that are in any job and, get it. They get it. They understand. It's like, okay, yeah, what God would you have given to me right now? This is your will for me, and I'm going to do the best of it. I'm going to Hebrews 12 this bad boy. I understand I've got to go through, difficulties, and you're molding me. But when you're in it, especially if you're pushing a broom and it just hit. I remember playing that for a couple people at the right time for them, and they're like, man, I needed that. So I had this affection for Gary's ability to write. Fast forward, all of a sudden he's writing this manifesto, and I'm like, he's like a hero, not idolizing him. It's just, he's a musical hero. Tourniquet and Deliverance are my favorite bands. I'm thinking, the hell happened? What happened? What road did he go down? I understand the
Yeah.
parable of the sower, but I'm praying for the guy, okay? And don't hear anything else. Then all of a sudden, this all sort of resurfaces with Stop the Bleeding. And I'm like, I talked to Pastor Bob on this show. I interviewed him a couple of years ago. And I think that Gary was kind of coming, and I don't know when it all happened, but regardless, that man is not only back in the realm of what we know he's a brother in Christ, he is unabashedly strong in his faith. And he doesn't mind telling people that. And I just am fascinated. I pray that one day he writes a story or a book. That's my take, man, as a fan. Now you're in it. You're in the thick. So sorry about rambling on about
No,
that.
no, no.
But can you see it from our perspective?
Yeah,
Like,
no. I mean, look, I mean, for me, early on, the perspective wasn't that much different. I mean, when we parted ways with Gary in '96, I think had spoken to him maybe once after that until we reconnected in, I guess, 2018, you know. Um, one of the things I will say about the culture of that band in the past is it was not always healthy.
yeah, okay,
And kind of the move was that if somebody was no longer in the band or no longer in our orbit, um, they they were gone. They were dead to us, you know.
yeah. Because when I interviewed your former drummer, and I'll just say that we kept good contact with each other, but it was right after Victor was
Hmm.
out of the band. And that conversation, I'll never forget it, because I remember walking out into the parking lot and a friend of mine listening to that interview, and he's just waiting out there, and he goes, Eastern Orthodox? He's like, is it really, was he really? Because I'm like, this guy wrote Sola Christus, you know, which is Reformed theology in a song, and I'm like, I don't know, man. And I'm like, I think that's kind of Victor. Again, you said it best, your answer, my answer, and then the truth of the matter. And so I wish I could have talked to Victor at that time. Incredible bass player. What a fun guy.
Yeah,
When the live video or the behind the scenes videos that we could rent and stuff on VHS tapes back in the day or DVD, he was always funny, and
yeah,
cracked me up. And I was like, man, this guy's such a cool dude. And
it's awesome. Victor on tour was always fun. I'm not in touch with him like I'd like to be. Some of that's just, we're at different places in life now. But I'm glad that we have reconnected over the past few years.
that's great.
Because, again, I mean, uh, being in a band in some ways is like being in a marriage with a bunch of people, you know.
Fair.
Nobody else, even, okay, tons of people are married, but if you line up three different couples and ask them, what is your marriage? You're going to get three different answers because, you know, nobody's is the same. And it's the same thing with a band. Everybody's experiences are different, everybody's dynamic is different, and it doesn't matter how many times you change somebody in or out, you're still connected to that person, especially if you've toured and you've done records and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but back to Gary, he was gone, and so you know, we didn't care. We don't have time for that guy. We have nothing to say to that guy. And, to be fair, there were times, in those, 20 whatever years that he and I were, not in touch. There were flare-ups here and there where it was not pretty, it was not friendly. And it probably kind of steeled the resolve on both sides that, yes, we're at war and we don't like these people. Um, but at some point, I mean, I was out of Tourniquet for a while, and Eric and I have stayed in touch off and on, since he left the band, and he and I had reconnected. We'd gone through, I hadn't heard from him in a couple years, and we reconnected over social media. And he starts telling me, you should call Gary. I'm like, I don't want to call Gary. I have nothing to say to Gary. He's like, come on, just call. It's been so long and blah blah blah. And I just that whatever, Mendez. Just leave it
Right.
leave it be. And then he texted me one day, and in the course of the conversation, he had brought it up again, and he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, I just want my friends to be friends again.
Wow.
And
Wow. That
put it
that
like
hits your
that, I
heart.
was like, it was like, Mendez. You So, I unblocked Gary on Facebook and, shot him a private message, and, we very tentatively started, reconnecting. And uh he he was working, well, he still does, he works in musical instruments. And so I asked him if he could get me into the NAMM show that year, and he did. And so, I didn't feel like I could, avail myself of his ability to get me a pass to the NAMM show and not at
Right.
least track him down and thank him. And, that was it.
Fair.
I walked up to him at the booth he was working, and, we started talking, and it was in some ways, we were both very different. It was 20 plus years later. I had much less hair than I had the last time I'd seen him.
You
Uh,
had some beautiful flowing locks, by
I,
the way, back in the day.
I miss it, man.
It's been
Genetics,
a long time that you've
genetics
been
suck, dude.
no hair, so I think it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Um, but in a lot of ways, it was like no time had passed, and I remember
That's
walking away, kind of kicking myself, going that I wasn't talking to him for how long, and over time, it's just it went from random texts and messages to hey, do you want to sing on this track, and hey, let's do this. And then suddenly we're doing Stop the Bleeding, and now we're working on doing it right in terms of being Tourniquet again.
yeah.
So
And as I dive into that, I'm going to play we're going to put in here a clip of the No Quarter, just for people to hear that work that you did for Gary.
mm,
And then, okay. So, moving now to the Tourniquet rebirth. Um, all right, fan side. That first Stop the Bleeding show, it was mesmerizing. It was awesome. But now, uh, it was more than awesome. The last year in Ohio in 25. Um, I posted on, I think it was Gary's, either Gary's share or your share. And I said, I had been Gary's. I said, I am as excited as a fat man at the Golden Corral after a Because I'm like, for those of us who've been there all these years and have, Tourniquet's generally my top listened to artist. It's weird. It's either Tourniquet or Brian Culbertson.
I
I'm
don't
a
know who that
huge,
is.
he's a jazz piano
Okay,
player.
nice.
He's relevant and yeah, look him up sometime. Crazy. I'll
Yeah,
send you a track. You'll dig
please
it.
do. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Um, but it's like, but you guys have been part. I loved your pop, the pop album that you did. I thought the pop rock album was so killer. It was
Thank you.
just, it was very you. And so, following all you guys and following Echo Hollow and then Victor playing on, I think is one of the coolest Deliverance albums. Which hear what I say, his yeah, some guy made a lip comment a couple months ago on social media about I've never felt like Tourniquet ever had a strong bass player, and I'm like, your mom. Victor's
I know
killer, and
that
even
guy too. I was like, really? Wow, you really posted that. Yeah.
yeah, I thought I kept waiting for the waka waka waka, being anyway. But to me, so you guys have now you have Anna.
Mhm.
You have a drummer that has been only shot from the backside. I know who it is. I'm not telling anybody. I'm going to let everybody find out. I know who it is because I know who that would. I'll just say maybe I'm going to guess it's the guy who once was in Demon Hunter. Okay, moving on from that. No, dang it, it's not Sprinkle. Okay, you guys are keeping this under wraps, and I dig it. And I'm not going to ask you to reveal.
I
Okay.
can't reveal. I gotta cut vocals this weekend, so that means I gotta see Gary. So that means no, I'm not revealing anything.
I'm not asking you then. How about that for an interviewer? I'm not actually going to hard press you on that. I think it's fun. So you guys got Neil. Is he playing? Swanson
Mhm.
playing on the
Yep.
record? Okay, he's phenomenal. What a
Yeah.
shredder and what a good dude. I got a chance to talk to
Okay.
him and yeah, I got a chance when you and Gary were kind of being hit by the in the meet and greet room. Anna and Neil and Devin were kind of off to the side, and I went right to them because they're great people, um, and I mean, but they're phenomenal musicians.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how joyous has this been for you to get back into this?
We've had really good people come through, good players and just good overall people come through the ranks, over the past, 30 whatever years. But I would honestly say that this version of the band is the best version of this band live that I've ever played with.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well,
Um,
Devin killed it. What a tough. That's a guy who has to sit in the seat of Ted, and
he asked for it. He asked for it. Gary met him for lunch. Gary used to work on the Sweetwater campus up in Fort Wayne, and Devin had reached out to him, and so they met up for lunch. And you know, I knew the name, but I couldn't remember why I knew the name. So Gary and I are texting, and he basically said, super cool guy. Had a good time. He, big Tourniquet fan. He loves Ted, and all that. It's all the usual stuff. And like the next day, he shoots me a video, and so I hit it and watch it, and it was Devin in his basement playing Arc along with the record and just killing it. I mean,
I
and with
bet.
way fewer drums. Way fewer drums. And I jokingly said, "When do we start rehearsals?" And
You
Gary's like,
sneaky sly man, you.
"It's funny you
Love
should
it.
say that because Devin had said, I don't know if this would ever be a thing, but if you guys ever play, I want a shot at that. I I want to at least try out." So fast forward to uh, the initial discussions about doing the stop the bleeding thing. There was who else are we going to call? We're going to call Devin.
Yeah,
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I might be a little bit off, because a lot of that came together on Gary's side,
sure,
but
sure.
um, and honestly, he was the one who really, really ran with it when the possibility came up. Gary Gary ran with it and made it all come together. But I I think it's safe to say that if Devin had not been in the mix, if we hadn't, had an idea that Devin was out there and wanted to do that, I don't know if Stop the Bleeding would have happened,
Which
But then,
therefore then you wouldn't have been where you are maybe
yeah,
now.
we would be, because even with that, we didn't like go into it like, we're gonna resurrect the thing. It was really more of a, because when Ted first passed away, Gary and I had some conversations about, how could we put together something, find somewhere central, where we know we can draw,
Sure.
and kind of, put the invite out to anybody who, has been in this band over the years. And we just do, a big mega show. And, that way, it's the closest thing to a reunion anybody's going to get. It gives us all some closure, and, we can all walk away, content.
Yeah.
And it just never really got beyond that stage of saying, well, what, maybe Chicago, maybe here, maybe, and so, when the Stop the Bleeding opportunity came up, Gary ran it by me. I'm like, I'm in, I'll do it. And then, lo and behold, Guy was down. And initially, we'd invited Eric and Victor, and it just didn't work out. It would have been awesome. It would have been a
Yeah, sure.
completely different animal, but it would have still been awesome.
Did they
Um,
show any interest?
yeah, yeah, they did, but there's other factors, that just it didn't work out.
Life.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and again, a lot of people are like, why can't you get this together? Why can't you get that together? We're not the same people that we were in 1993,
Yeah,
and
we're talking 33 years later. I mean, that's
like, I wouldn't know how to not, it, it- even if nobody cared, about what I do. And I don't say that like, everybody's very into me, it's not like that, but,
no.
I don't know how to do anything else. I like songs, more so than genres or specific players. I mean, yeah, there's people I'm fan of, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the song, and so I'm constantly, whether it's me trying to do one of my awful demos, or just me in my head trying to build things. I'm always chasing songs. I don't know how to do anything else, but I know other people that I played with back in the day who were super passionate about it when we were younger, who, that ship has sailed, and, they do
Yeah.
sales now.
Yeah.
They're marriage counselors now, and, and that's fine. So, for whatever the reasons, we asked, and they weren't able to do it. And, that's fine. We just kept going. But when we did that first STB show at Immortal Fest, when we booked it, we just figured, okay, it's one and done. It's not what we were picturing for the one and done, but hey, it's one and done. And then when word got out that we were doing that, then Light the Dark reaches out from Sweden. So then we're like, okay, we get to say goodbye in the States, we get to say goodbye in Europe, and awesome. And then by the time we finished, we got to the Sweden show, the second Ohio show had popped up. And so it was like, Gary and and Guy at that point, we'd already started talking about it. Maybe we keep doing this, And so now here we are, what, I guess 2 years later.
Yeah.
And, and
An amusing anecdote about that. I do a podcast called um, Transatlantic with the lead singer of Pantocrator, Carl
hmm,
Waldferson, and he and I, he's a great man. He's in Sweden. He traveled 3.5 hours to Light the Dark to specifically see you guys because he's
that's
a huge fan.
crazy.
So we were joking on we had to take a little bit of a hiatus for some reason, but we're getting ready to get back into it as well as Freaks of the Vine. So I got a lot of stuff kicking back up. But we talked about it at the last show. He had his tourniquet shirt on, And I did not wear mine, but we were talking about the fact that you guys have played live 3 times, and the two of us have seen all 3 shows. I went to Ohio for both Immortal Fest, and he was in Sweden to see that. And so, trust me, after we saw you guys, and then he's like, "How's it going? Well, how was it? How was it?" And I'm filling him in. I just called him like, "Dude, it's killer, right?" Then they're coming to light the dark, and so we've had a really fun time with that. But it's been just joyful for us. We're both
Yeah.
early 50s. We're like, this is our childhood, or early 20s on. Um, you getting the chance to do this again also means a lot to you guys,
Mhm.
obviously to fans. How how excited are you about the music?
Very. When Ted and I parted ways, um, I had no interest in doing anything uh, even remotely tourniquet. When I did the pop disaster, I sat down with Chris, my my partner that I did that record with, um, and I had a couple of rules. One of them was that I was shooting, for songs no longer than 3 minutes, because I really wanted to lean into that pop structure. But also anything that sounded like it would have been done by, and at the time I didn't even want to say the name. So anything that sounded like it would have been done by that band, we're not doing it.
I
Partly
respect
because
that.
it's like, like Bruce Dickinson, love Bruce Dickinson, but when he does solo records, they're not that dissimilar to Maiden records.
No,
Why are you doing a solo record that does not sound that, unlike your day job?
you didn't
If you're,
like Tattooed Millionaire? Just kidding.
I
It's
don't dislike it,
no,
but
but it's
you
like
know,
to me
yeah,
it's the Iron Maiden light.
right. And it's that's not a slam. If that's
Right.
his creative, muse takes him, then hey, knock yourself out. That's at the end of the day, you know, being a creative is as much about satisfying your own creative, urge as it
Yeah.
is about making sure that somebody else gets something out of it. I'm not wired that way. So, if I was going to do a solo thing, I'm going to do something that's, completely different than what I normally do, you know. But when the idea of us, doing new tourniquet stuff came up, initially I was like, well, how's that going to work? And um, I've said for years that I'm not wired melodically to write metal, and so now I have to retract that statement because I wrote 3 songs for the new record. Um,
Awesome.
but it it's just crazy because I don't think any of us had this on our bingo card that, we're going to be, talking about new tourniquet stuff in 25, 26, and beyond. But at the same time, it's like the timing is right, and
Yeah.
people seem interested, and it seems like we're still relevant. And, Gary and I talk about this a lot. We still have things we want to say, and we still have, we're still young enough, that we could do this. It's a little
Yeah.
harder to recover the next day, but still get it done.
Yeah,
Um,
amen.
and so, what are we going to do? Be presented with an opportunity to do something that, yeah, I mean, in my case, when Ted and I parted ways, I'd been with that band just over half my life at that point, you know.
Yeah.
Um, And so, you- how many people get another shot at something like that?
Great point. Yep.
So, we're at the risk of sounding, overly dramatic. I think we're approaching it, seriously and reverently, in terms of what it is, but also with purpose for what we think it could be moving forward. And, we're just there's nobody better suited to decide what is tourniquet or not than us.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
Gary
right.
was there at the beginning. I've been there since '93. Um, we are as much tourniquet as anybody else.
No doubt about it. It's not like another example of somebody, 20 years later, you have one original member that really wasn't original. He was like the
Right.
seventh album. When you're going to go see Black
Like
Oak,
Skinner.
Arkansas.
Skinner
Yeah,
has zero original people. You
correct.
know.
That's just the name carried on. You guys are a lot different with this. All right.
Yeah.
For sake of keeping you any longer, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure.
I got a couple rapid fired questions for you, and I usually just do four, but I'm going to do a couple because I think you can nail these out. Question about when can we possibly expect? I guess I'll preface the rapid fire with asking you, do you have an idea when we might expect to get to hear a sample of what's coming? It's hard to say.
It's hard to say.
You got to deal with the Library of Congress portion too.
There's still homework. There's still boxes that need to be ticked before we
Got it.
can, you know, we can colloquially refer to ourselves as Tourniquet right now, but we can't really professionally refer to ourselves that way. So until we get that resolved, um, I don't think anybody will hear anything for a while. We're still a
Okay.
little ways off. I mean, the bulk of the instrumental tracks are done. I still have vocals to finish up, but then, there's a lot of editing and mixing and all of that stuff. So we're still a ways out. We would love it if it could drop this year, but I don't know.
Well, I've said it all along. I've been waiting for 30 years, essentially, for this because it's you and Gary playing again together, and a little bit longer. You know what I mean? It just
Yeah.
you got to be a little bit patient in our microwave society. We have
Yeah,
to be a little bit
true.
patient, and anything worth it's all worth waiting for.
Totally.
Um, what's your favorite? Okay, what's your favorite Tourniquet song to play live? Sing live.
Oh, wow.
I know there's several, but if you had to pick one, what would you settle on?
Dog's Breakfast has always been fun.
That's a
I
challenge.
mean, there's a lot of them that are fun. I mean, for a long time, I would have said Phantom Limb. It's a fun song, and I use a bunch of different voices in that song. But with
Yeah.
Dog's Breakfast, for a long time we would do Dog's Breakfast as the encore. So we'd leave the stage, and then Aaron would start playing that the riff at the beginning while we were still off stage, and people would lose their minds, and between kind of, getting it to be a little bit of a sing along on the I was fooled again lines, and, getting the pit just, raging, and just building it up, building it up, building it up. Cause I mean, that opening riff, you could just, you play it all night if you want, you
It's
know,
so awesome.
Ted would do fills and vamps and, getting the crowd going, so, yeah, that one's definitely a favorite.
Fair. That's good. Um, I really wanted to ask you this question with a straight face. Let me try it. How disappointed were you when Lizette's name was finally taken off when The Love Is Right?
I can't really talk about that.
Okay, we're gonna move
That's,
on.
yeah.
uh, do you miss the seafood in California?
I'm not a huge seafood guy,
So then, okay.
but it is one of those things where if I'm out and like I do want to have seafood, it just seems really weird to be far inland. I mean, even just like, with sushi or something, it's like I have
Yeah,
no idea where that fish came from or how long ago it was caught, you know.
you're closer to the East Coast
Yeah,
than
but
I.
I mean,
It's still not the same.
it's not the same as being, you're downtown San Francisco, and they caught it 20 minutes ago,
Yeah.
5 minutes from here at, in the bay. So
Is Nashville bad about trying to sell us on like they do here in Kansas that somehow catfish is a seafood plate?
not in my experience. I
Oh,
mean,
it's terrible here.
I like
It's
catfish.
not. A lot of people do. Well, the key to catfish is if you do catch it. I've learned this trick years ago, being a Kansan for 40 plus years, is once you fillet them, you soak it in Sprite for at least six
Interesting.
hours. It takes the metallic pond flavor out, and then you
Okay.
can rinse it and then batter, and you cannot tell it's catfish.
Okay.
It's got the flavor, it just doesn't have the mud, so it's interesting. Um, oh, I wanted to ask you, do you ever? Okay, one of my favorite songs of all time ever, period, is Tire Kicking.
Mhm.
Have you seen, and is it, I think it's Perfect Night for Hanging. There are two fan made videos of those songs. Have you seen both?
I've seen the Perfect Night for a Hanging one with the Peanuts.
Peanuts. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
but
still one of the,
I didn't know there was a tire kicking one.
there was a kid, and I believe they were in Europe, and they did a homemade video, a fan video of tire kicking, and it's got the cross swinging on the car, and the four guys are driving and they're headbanging to it. But it's really cool.
I'm gonna have to find that. I did not know
Yeah,
that was a thing.
it's a fan made video, and it's awesome. Yeah, I think you guys would really appreciate that. All right. I know there's a million things I want to ask you, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to make you laugh. Who would you rather invite over for dinner, Nancy Pelosi or Gavin Newsom?
Am I exempt from that whole Ten Commandments thing? You know,
The third, well, the 11th commandment, as Bodhi Bacham always said, "Thou shalt be nice." Right?
yeah. It,
You
I
are
have
exempt.
I've never run into to Pelosi. I have seen Gavin out and about before he was the lieutenant governor, and he looks just as slimy and fake in person as he does when he's, orating on television.
Yeah. We had it when we were younger. Isn't it crazy where it's gone?
Yeah.
Like, it's not. It's not the same. Like
No.
the insanity level. And, people, it's like you got to be really careful because I'm an expository preaching pastor. I do line by line, verse by verse, and I don't get hung up on all this other garbage. It's easy to. But actually, Michael Drive, gave me a fantastic word of encouragement a few years ago. He just came up. He's like, "So you're a pastor?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's a little guy, great brother. But he grabs me and he just gets up in my ear and he just says, "Keep preaching just the word.
Yeah.
Don't get off on this." He goes, "People," and I'm like, I needed to hear it because I'd been doing that, but it's like we're growing. Still a small congregation, but we're growing because people just want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear all the other baloney. And it's so crazy how many people, like pastors, aren't teaching or gospel teachers aren't teaching the gospel anymore. I think there's a resurgence, sort of like there's a resurgence of people going, all right, this political landscape is ridiculous. And I know you and I both are very opinionated about that. And I really appreciate your commentary. I always do. I enjoy reading the stuff you put out and the morons that you're able to defend. Very well, by the way. Good job. Way to handle it. You do a great job of abiding by those Ten Commandments. However,
Some of it's protecting the brand. I mean, you can't be rude, but it's also some of it
yep,
is, like Facebook standards and stuff. I've never been suspended or anything, but I say some really pointed stuff sometimes, but it you can't make it personal.
no,
You can't you can attack the idea, but it doesn't matter how. I mean, uh, if I had to shake Gavin Newsom's hand, I would feel like I needed an acid bath after to get all the ick off. But that said, if I wound up in an elevator with Gavin Newsom and he struck up a conversation, I would do my best to be gracious, and I think that applies across the board, because it's not about us,
no,
it's you either are going to live out your faith and you're either going to represent your savior or you're not.
yeah.
So,
Well,
and
but
that's not to say that I get it right all the time because I don't.
sure,
But that's the marching orders, you
yes, it
know.
is. Paul, Peter says to make a defense of the hope that's in you, but do so in gentleness and respect.
Yeah.
Gentleness and respect. And we are obviously to love our neighbor as ourselves, right? We're to love God, love our neighbor self. And so that means that we have to lead in love, but it doesn't mean we have to roll over. And I think that's the
No,
big difference with Christianity.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as we finish today, I was going to just ask you to take the floor, and if you would share how important, how important your faith is to you, and what you've always done and what you do now. Just whatever's on your heart. Take it away for a minute or two.
I don't understand how people get through life without faith. I mean, everybody has faith in something, but I mean specifically, faith in Christ, faith in God. Because even having that and holding on to that and understanding the hope that, comes along with that, life is not fun. Life is not easy. And so when somebody tells me that, that they're an atheist or whatever, it's like, to me, that would take so much more faith to try and, it would take so much more effort to believe that, but also I would be completely despondent if I didn't have, hope in Christ, if I didn't have salvation, in Christ. Um, I'm a horrible example of a believer. I have a mouth when I want to. I have a temper if I'm not paying attention. I've been accused before of I call myself a believer, but I don't see much joy in your life. A lot of days, or not, I won't say a lot of days. There are many days where I am not a believer because I want to be a believer. I'm a believer because I've committed myself to that being the truth and the way. And if it kills me, I'm gonna, stay the course. And then there's other days where it's like, yeah, I like this. This is cool. That, God's awesome. But, there's also days where it's like, this sucks. I hate this, but we're not promised, yeah, we're promised joy, but we're not promised, fullness of joy, the
Yeah.
the whole thing on this side of eternity. And you know, I'm not the poster child for what it means to be a believer or what it looks like to be a believer, but I hope that if I'm anything, I hope that I'm notable um for being committed to it and sticking with it even when I don't want to. And I know that some people probably don't like hearing it put that way, but I think if more people could be, I don't want to say honest because I don't. It's not like if people would be a little bit more willing to be
Transparent.
transparent, be a little bit more genuine about the fact that as much as our lives are blessed because we follow Christ, that it's also really challenging, and that there's some times where it does, there's times where that it sucks. Steve Taylor has a great lyric. It's harder to believe than not to. You know, and then
Yeah.
that's real. You know, that's real. But you know what? This is the only life I know.
Mhm.
I have very publicly said that this is what I believe and that this is what life is supposed to look like. And, that adds extra weight to it. How much damage would be done if I all of a sudden just got up one day and said, you know what, I don't believe anymore. And if you do, you're a fool. You know, I don't
Yeah.
I don't want that responsibility and that weight. Because you know what? I would probably get up a couple days later and go, that's the stupidest thing I ever said. And then you have
Right.
to walk it all back. So you know what? You have a bad day, you have a bad day. Start over the next one and just keep pressing on because, you know, the prize is not in this life. The prize is on the other side.
Amen.
So
That's
take up
right.
your cross and follow. And if it sucks, it sucks. If it's great, then it's great. But follow.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think the realism of what you just said was honest and it was very genuine. And I think that's okay. We almost live in a culture, a church culture, for many years that's not okay to talk about that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but it is. Last night I had a Bible study. Several people were there. We were just talking. I was reading the end of Second Corinthians chapter 6, and I was talking about all the stuff that Paul was referring to: imprisonment, beatings, riots, all the things they endure. And then he leads into chapter 7, which is like, but your joy,
Hmm.
you have to welcome us into your heart as we have
Yep.
yours. And it's this great gap. And I went around and I asked everybody, I was like, what's something that you struggle with? And everybody did. And it was everything from pornography, um, might have been alcohol, might have been anger, forgiveness, whatever it was. But it was like, well, we got done. There was a wonderful prayer time. And I had people texting me all day. They're like, that was a really good study. And I'm like, you know why? Because you guys participated. Because this is real. Like, if you want to grow as a church family, which is everywhere, from, you're in Nashville, I'm to Topeka, we're brothers in Christ. We're not only going to see each other here on this interview, but we're going to see each other maybe in another show. We're
Yep.
definitely going to see each other on the other side. Let's start acting like, your grievances and your offenses aren't so grievous an offense when you realize that we're lying to each other if we don't,
Yeah.
welcome another person in because of what their problem is.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't want to, and you say something like that, and they're like, well, wait a minute. You don't want them to, there's a big difference between acceptance and toleration, and accepting is accepting a person right where they're at in the mud in where they are. And your prayer is that through Christ, they don't even tolerate their own sin. They're either going to run into his arms and let Jesus break them, or they're going to leave, uh,
Yeah.
no matter what.
I mean, the word is clear that all have sinned, but yet we have this whole Christian culture that is based around rejecting people because they sin differently than you do.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It doesn't
And
mean
that,
that you accept things that are bad. It doesn't mean you don't call things out when they're out of line. But there's a reason why songs like "I Want to Be a Clone," from Steve Taylor, still resonate
yes,
because
they
that
do.
culture still exists. You know,
He, I'm glad you brought him up. I mean, like, he has been one of those underrated is not the right word, but underrated. And I'll never forget. He wrote a line with Jamie Rowe on the song's "Lion's Den,"
Mm.
and it says, talking about the experience of what it must have been. I'm talking to the prophet Daniel, and he comes out of the solo, and it says, "Who says I wasn't a feline phobe? Who says I wasn't ready to wet my robe?" As Daniel would be saying it, and I'm
Yeah,
like, how real is that? Hell,
yeah,
yes, he's gonna piss himself. You would have
yep,
too, and Job would have, we would have responded like Job. We didn't cuss our God. What we did was tell him how pissed off we are.
yeah,
That is exactly why God at the end of the book of Job says you need to be more like my servant Job, which is honest,
yeah.
but
I will take
glorifying God.
anything that you're gonna throw at me, but please don't throw any more at me because I can barely handle what you're throwing me at me as it is.
Yes, that's a real conversation.
You know?
That's what you've done, brother. You have shown the light through your passionate singing. The lyrics, no matter who authored them, if you did or anybody else did, you sang them and they resided in our ears and they settled in our hearts. And you've done that for a long time. And we cannot wait until whatever is being done now is coming out. And we'll wait patiently because we know it's going to be you. In the meantime, I really recommend everybody go check out Brother Luke's webpage, which we'll put on here, lukeeaster.com, and check out, if you haven't, go to your streaming platform or even go buy a record if you can of his wonderful solo album. I still think it's underrated. I think it needs to be played more. I dig it, and I think we just dig what you've done and the fact that
Thank
you've
you.
been honest about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
A
Appreciate
lot.
you taking the time with us, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be
Thank
here.
you. I'll send you a copy of this when we're all finished and done. Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
Lord bless you, buddy.
Later on.
Thanks.